We're a branding agency anyway, so we're the only branding agency here at Neighbourhood Works. We specialise in food and beverage, and we specialise in culture brands as well. But you know, brand identity, brand strategy, print, packaging, environmental, those are sort of main things we sort of cover off. I mean, we're still looking to sort of niche down a little bit. Most companies that really sort of craft their way sort of tend to sort of get into a really niche area. So 4 years old now, we're still in that process of fine-tuning what our company is about. I think it's probably the same as what most people would say. I think, well, I was 13 years in the industry full-time, and I think 8 years of that was freelance. And I think as good as freelance is, everybody gets to that point where money is one thing, but actually finding purpose in what you do is more important to sort of drive you. Otherwise, you're not in the right industry either. I think you have to be really highly motivated to do great work that means something. I mean, I think when you run your own business, you can take it a number of ways. I know people that set their company very young, with very little years in the industry, and it consumes. And I've been there, and when we started our company, I think it was quite a deliberate thing that when we started up, it was to sort of create a bit more balance. As much as you probably have to be fully invested, we think work life is really important. You're mentally applying yourself all the time. So I think having that balance, sort of giving that space, only makes you more productive. You have to take time out. It's not that culture of sitting at a desk in your lunch. You have to be self-disciplined, take breaks, because you know, I personally, talking from my own experience, if I take a break or take 2 hours out, I'll catch up because I become more productive, magically productive. So like, I'm quite conscious. It does slip, but it's quite important just to sort of remind yourself now and then. It's like, it's not everything. And I think you can draw on so many things in your life. It's not just about design. It's a really good question, and I think this last 4 years has been a really interesting time to run a company. We were really fortunate that we started the year before COVID. I think I had a few months, and my partner joined a few months later. But starting before COVID was really fortunate that it allowed us to sort of establish and start reaching out before everything sort of shut down for a year, and that really helped us get us through. But equally, COVID did bring its own opportunities as well, and we talked about taking rest and sort of rejuvenating yourself, I suppose. And for most people in different lines, but I think that sort of applied. And we started doing more labour of love projects rather than sort of just paid work and just sort of going through that cyclical pattern. But obviously it's bit back with a vengeance now. Like this last year, since August, it's ramped up and we're sort of gone the opposite way. So it was actually, in hindsight, a really good time to take a little bit of a break. And our most successful project in terms of awards was actually created in lockdown. It's not all bad, not all bad. The year ahead, well, I think we're just like, we're at this point now where we're slightly between sort of weather fronts, I suppose. We come off the summer, very, very busy time, and now we're sort of trying to recollect. And one of those things that's really important to try and do in a company is find time to sort of nurture the portfolio, look a bit more inwards to try and build for that next round. Because obviously if you get too stuck in, there's nothing following up afterwards. So our outlook for the next year is to try and maybe re-look at our website, re-push on our sort of social channels. That's been slightly neglected probably the last year because we've just been too busy, but it happens to most people. But running a two-person operation, that's probably one of the perils. It's like you have to prioritise things. But I think we're quite excited. We've just acquired a new client, Royal Air Force Museum, and I think that's one of those areas between us. Because it sort of really ticks that culture box, and also this design and education. I think between us, we've always worked with a lot of brands where design that informs and educates can be really rewarding compared to just doing design that sort of sells something. So RAF Museum it ticks the designer ego box as well, because ultimately we're looking at designing big aircraft hangars. So seeing your work 10 metres high and 20 metres wide is pretty self-satisfying, I'll say, without any sense of smugness. Remind yourself why you set up a business in the first place. Because if you're going to set up a business and get on that same hamster wheel and still work yourself to death, it's like, it's one thing being motivated, but it's a very fine line. So I think taking time out to nurture yourself is important, and that shows in your work, because it gives you opportunity to sort of take your work in different directions, take holidays, take the afternoon off, go to a museum. I mean, London Fields here, we're lucky enough to have a Lido. So a Lido is a great thing just to, well, maybe winter as well, depending how brave you are, but Lido is a great one just to sort of take an hour or two out and just replenish. I think maybe last year it probably swung a bit more in favour of the smaller boutique, but I don't see really bigger agencies suffering. All the big agencies that have really crafted their sort of made their impact in the last few years are still going strong. So I think there's place for everyone. I just think maybe bigger agencies have to be more self-aware and a bit smarter about how they look after their clients to give them value for money. But the value for money is a big thing with smaller agencies. It's not everything, but it does give you a little bit of an advantage. We've done our share of different co-working. I think co-working's always felt right. We've from 4 years ago, we sort of started hot desking, but there's two elements there. There's Neighbourhood Works and there's also the area. Neighbourhood Works has a really good community. There's no other branding agency here, which was quite a surprise for the area as well. Like, there's a really big mix, and that in itself gives a good opportunity to be more reflective and get different perspectives. So that's great, and we quite like being the only design agency here. It does give a really useful insight itself, and it doesn't mean you're around the same sort of echo chamber. So we like that, and obviously London Fields, we live in Dalston, so as far as commutes go, it is really cushy. No getting buses, no tubes, that's great. Just walking through the park every day gets a good way to start, and the areas, I mean, the only bad thing is the amount of food and drinking establishments. There's obviously too many, right? So it's its own draw, and I think we just love about being in London Fields. Yeah, Neighbourhood Works, great, and it's also, Neighbourhood Works for us is definitely like home from home. Think bigger co-working setups. You do feel like it's either, if you're going in on a weekend, for example, it's just a big shell, but here it feels like you can drop in and it just feels like, just get covered, and it doesn't feel like you're sacrificing a weekend. It feels quite nice. It's a good routine, so we're really lucky actually. It brings its own opportunity, because say if you're working alongside other design agencies, that is a potential links to work in the future. But it is also said, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good perspective. We've obviously got people that do buildings and architects and breweries and stuff, so it's, yeah, it does bring really good insight, good balance. Ooh, back in time or into the future? Obviously, most people probably would say into the future. Do you know what? Like, I think back in time probably would suggest that there's regrets or there's something you want to change. I don't really feel like that. I feel like everything's happened on the right time for me. I've always said that to my partner. She's like, from the moment I went to university to leaving university to having my first proper relationship and stuff. I think it's all, and setting up the business, of course. I feel like I've always left jobs at the right time. I think I've always moved on. I haven't really looked back. So I don't feel like I'm probably one for going back. The future, probably. I'll probably say the future. Intriguing. Yeah. But yeah, by default, I'd say. Yeah. I think that answers itself, but we got the best of both worlds. So no, like I think you don't go into design to work somewhere that you're not inspired by. So why bother? So it's got to be the first one. You travel 2 hours to get your dream job. I think we do both, if I'm being honest. I don't know.
6 day weeks with working hours?
I think it depends what mode you're in. Yeah. Like, there's some work you're doing where you're just like a machine and you're just getting work done. And in that case, you might as well just like ripping a Band-Aid. You might as well just work through it and just do long hours, because coming back to do that stuff the next day isn't maybe the most productive way to attack things. But we do a lot of 6 days. And actually, as I said before, I quite like taking leaving early to go to a museum or sort of enrich my brain in a different way. But so when you're doing sort of more manageable hours or 6-hour intensive bursts, I think you can do 6 days and it doesn't feel like it's impacting because you're thinking so much more other enriching things, I suppose. So I think we flip, actually. I'm quite open-minded to both. Ooh. I'm trying to think of the scenarios that apply. So writing emails, but I don't like writing. I mean, they will get the emails out of the way, but your brain has to keep up. And then reading. Do you know what? I maybe would probably value reading more. I think just to be able to absorb the content. I do have a bit of a goldfish memory, as my partner always reminds me. I always forget useful things, but I hold on to quite useless things, like pub quiz trivia and all that sort of stuff. 80s pop music. Yeah, yeah, not good for listening in for client meetings, so I do need somebody to back me up there occasionally. You heard it here first.